Well, it's been said there are only two types of speakers. There are those who have something to say, and those who have to say something. And I'm certainly in the second category. All of us who are here at TEDx today have to say something. They give you 15 minutes to say something simple and smart and something encouraging, something memorable, something profound. It's a tall order, isn't it? Because you stand up and you're in front of smart people and it's going to be put on the web. And it's enough to make you nervous. And as these last few weeks, as I prepared, I realized at one point I'm not nervous. And I thought, I wonder why I'm not nervous. There's only two reasons why people wouldn't be nervous for an experience like this. One is because they're awesome, like maybe Oprah or Bill Clinton or Billy Graham. Somebody could just stand up, and they've been so good so often, so many times. They're just great speakers. And so they know that fear of public speaking that comes from a fear of failure is not going to happen. They're going to be awesome that day. And that's not why I'm not nervous. The other reason is because you had failed so often and so miserably in front of large crowds before that it ain't going to get any worse today than it has been repeatedly in your life. And so I'm in that boat. I lived in Uganda for 10 years, and I worked in rural areas, and I learned a language called Lusoga. I would go out and I would sit in rural areas and talk with people about what was good and what was bad about their villages. I was a development worker and a missionary. And so as I would go out, I had many experiences where I would try to communicate things that were important, and they wouldn't quite go like I imagined. One time I went out with my dad, who was visiting from Michigan, and we were headed into this village. We're pulling in, and I realized, Dad, they're going to ask you to speak. I forgot all about this. I mean, you're the oldest guy here, and so you better be thinking of something. And as we walked in, there's probably 200 people all lined up, banana fiber thatched roof, and just people crowded in shouting and screaming and happy and laughing. And we sat down, and then the time came for my dad to speak and me to translate. Yeah, my dad stood up, and I thought he would say, I'm happy to be here today. And I would say, which is, I'm happy to be here. He's happy to be here today. He didn't say that. He said this. He said, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. So I thought for a second, and I said, well, in my culture, we have this story of an Eggman. And in the story of an Eggman in my culture, this egg is apparently perched on a wall. And in my mind, I'm thinking of that traditional picture we all have of Humpty Dumpty, of this egg with eyes, and his chin and his belt are the same thing, you know, and his spindly legs, and for some reason this fragile creature has perched on a precarious place. And it takes a while. And I look out at the crowd, and at that point I realize that everyone there is lost. And they're looking at me with that look you don't want from a crowd, like they feel totally sorry for me. You've seen people die in front of a crowd. They're looking at me that way. And so my dad's looking at me like, how long can it take you to say Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall? And then my dad goes, well, Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. And so I begin on to say, well, then the Eggman, apparently, though it's not spoken in the story, it's understood, he fell from a distance that apparently was a sufficient distance and onto a sufficiently hard surface so that he broke, though it's not stated in the story. It's understood that he broke. And it was bad. And I looked out, and of all these lost faces, people who loved me and didn't want me to do that badly, in the back was a guy named Sam Suti, and I looked at Sam, and Sam has his master's degree, speaks English better than me, speaks Lusoga obviously better than me. I looked at Sam, and Sam just went like this. He wanted no part of the disaster that was unfolding. And as I think about that, the passion to stand up and to say, I got something really important to say today. That's what TEDx is all about. And for those of us who are here, we come and we say, wow, I really want to be inspired. I want to hear something interesting and something that will change my life. Because at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter what is said, because what is said, when all is said and done, what matters is what is done, right? And this ED that's behind TED here, those of us who are encouraged about education, who care about education, we have this reputation. People, what do they say about teachers? Those who can do and those who can't teach, right? And my friend David Phillips said, and those who can't teach, coach. That's the next one. And so we have this reputation, those of us that care about education. We're here and we realize we don't have this reputation as doers. We are just sayers. And so we come and we say things, and these words float around. But I want to challenge us to remember that we are doers in that we are people who shape and form identity. And when you shape and form identity in another human being, you are creating an agent to go and do something, to actually do something in the world that's exciting and that's powerful. And my question today is this: what is it that you want people to go and do. Not a prescriptive thing, because people are all different and they're going to do different things. But if you're an educator, if you're a mentor, if you're a coach, what is that thing that you want people to go and to do? And the second question is sort of along the same lines, but it's this: what's the incremental evidence in your life that you're serious about that? And so I want to kind of move along and tell you a couple stories, and they're stories about what I do for a living. I do this for a living. I work at Manna Nutrition. We started Manna a few years ago. We make this therapeutic peanut butter paste. I have some right here. It is, and there'll be some on the tables you can check out. It's a simple peanut butter paste for severely, acutely malnourished children. We make it for UNICEF and for the World Food Program and for World Vision and for places like that. Now, the problem we have at Manna is that we need people to do something, and we need to say some things to inspire them to get them to do it. We sell this to UNICEF, but UNICEF budgets are static. You don't want your taxes going up, I would guess, any more than what they are already, and we supply about 60 to 70% of UNICEF's global budget, so it's not coming up from US dollars. And as we look at all the starving kids in the world who need a ready-to-use therapeutic food, this simple peanut butter concoction that Doctors Without Borders and 60 Minutes and others have said, finally we have something. It's a miracle. You put it in their hands and boom, these kids, it's like penicillin, they're better. If we can get that into their hands, we need the money to do it. And so the challenge at Manna that we have is to imagine something beyond the UNICEF static budgets, and to grow the other $1 billion that we need, roughly, to feed kids. A child dies from malnutrition every 6 seconds. That's 5 million a year. That's more than AIDS. That's more than malaria. That's more than TB. That's more than all of them combined times 5. It's amazing. But in spite of those heartbreaking statistics, we have some good news. And the good news is that this peanut butter stuff is not for every hungry kid in the world, but it's for these kids, this specific little slice who we can change and we can save them. And so to do that, we started thinking about, well, how do we get the word out? How do we tell people? And so we did what I'm sure you would do if you were faced with this. We went out and we bought a 1971 Winnebago on eBay. Now, we didn't really do this on purpose. I just have this kind of penchant for looking for strange things, and this was, I put an alert on, and it came up, and I was like, wow, that thing's awesome. Boom, we bid, and we accidentally bought this thing. So we own this 71 Winnebago. Once we owned it, we figured, well, we better do something with it. So we decided to create a mobile classroom, and this Winnebago went out, and as it went out, we called it the MANAbago. And these two young guys, Alex and Mark, are good friends of mine. I kind of rousted them up from different places in life. They didn't know one another, but I had known them at different points in life and generally liked these guys a lot and thought they were very trustworthy, good young men, and said, hey, how'd you like a great deal? You can come and work for us for 3 months during the fall. You're going to drive a 71 Winnebago, and we're going to put a tent on this thing, and you're going to pull into a college campus and put this tent out, and it's going to be this interactive center called a therapeutic feeding center. Now, the programs where you feed people this stuff, the Manna, are called community management centers. It's called CMAM. And what we wanted to do was show interactively students that this is what's happening and this stuff is what they need. And so these guys went out. They took off with their tents and they started going to college campuses, and we were hemorrhaging money on the gas bill on this thing. And they're driving around. They went to the University of Georgia. They keep going westward. They go out to Texas. Rave reviews, followers on Twitter. Kids love them. They're both charming. They have mustaches. People love these guys. And they had an 8-track player in this MANAbago, and they finally got out to California on their way to Pepperdine University, which is a pretty nice place, and they're on their way up through the Malibu Canyon, and when they get to the Malibu Canyon, I get a phone call. We were on our way back from our factory, which is down in Georgia, and it was late, and I was driving through South Carolina, and the phone rang, and I looked at it, and it was Alex Cox. And I answered it, and I knew I was in trouble. He said, Mark, this is Alex. I said, I know that, Alex. I have you on my phone. He said, the MANAbago is a giant ball of flames. And I was going to show you that video, but I won't. You can actually see it online. It blew up. It blew up because of the brakes, and it was like Hollywood-level explosion. This thing blows up. And so we hung up the phone, and I said, listen, let's talk in the morning. Was anyone hurt? They said, no one was hurt. No other person was injured. We don't owe anyone. This is amazing that we got out of this the way we did. And so the next morning, I got on the phone with these guys, and I said, hey, we're going to get you some tickets to fly you home. And they said, no, we've been thinking about it, and we're not stopping. We're going to keep going. I said, but everything you have burned up, your clothes burned up, everything, all you have is cell phones. And they said, but we have backpacks now, and the firefighters gave us some stuff. And we're on our way to go and complete the rest of our mission. And they took off, and they finished it. And when they finished their journey, it was amazing. They hitchhiked 2,000 miles to end this journey. And I said, I don't have any money, I can't pay you. And they were like, who cares? And the point is this, that when you say something and people do something, you better be prepared, right? For them to really be inspired, for them to really be serious. And I was like, these guys are crazy. They're overly serious. I mean, we need to fly them home, you know? Someone could have been hurt. And they started this, and it's called Good Spread. Good Spread is their company, not my company, not affiliated with Manna, other than when you buy a packet of Good Spread, you actually give away a packet. So it's a neat thing, and I tell you that story, and the question I want to ask you today is not necessarily to make a case for inspiration, because I think it's a pretty easy case to make, right? We all want to be inspired. We all want to go out and inspire others. But the question is how? Do we all go get a 71 MANAbago? I can help you if you need one. I can work on that. Do we depend on our creativity or our unique personalities? I mean, what is it? And I think all of those things are true when we're talking about really inspiring other people, because when all is said and done, what matters is what is done, right? And so when we think about that challenge, what I want to encourage us today is that as educators or mentors or people who care about making a difference, that there's some encouraging realities out there in human beings in general. And I want to encourage you that your position of authority, whatever it may be, whether you're a teacher on a payroll or someone who kind of teaches on accident and doesn't get paid for it, your position of authority is a tremendous opportunity to make this kind of change in people's life and to truly inspire people. This guy here is Willard Waller. What's interesting is the village I was at with my dad was called Waka Waka, so I thought about calling this From Waka Waka to Willard Waller, but that'd be a little much. But this is Willard Waller. I doubt anyone's heard of him. In the 1920s and 30s, as a sociologist who looked at things he was interested in for his socio-scientific research. One of those things was the family. He'd been, in the 1920s, a new phenomenon had started to occur, and it was that of divorce. And as divorce happened, he was a child of a divorced family, and so he studied it once he got his PhD from the University of Chicago, and he looked at divorce and issues and relationships between people. And courtship relationships, how do they form? And he looked at military relationships between seniors and their superiors and their subordinates. And he also looked at teaching, and he became an expert in the sociology of teaching. That's where he found his home, and his kind of most famous work is on the sociology of teaching. And he developed this principle, and it's called the principle of least interest. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of it, but it's pretty amazing. And I've experienced the principle of least interest, so I know it's true. The principle of least interest says this, that power lies in the hands of the person who cares the least about any relationship. The person who does not care has the upper hand. Now, I experienced this in college with girls that I liked. They were the most powerful because the principle of least interest was working against me in that particular instance. And Waller actually, in his research, talks about that, courtship and dating relationships, in really powerful ways. And he began to study, actually went in and studied these couples as they interact with one another. And he would find, as we've all seen, that you'd have a young man who cared less and less about a young woman, and he treated her worse and worse. And as he treated her worse and worse, oddly, for those of us on the outside, would see him become more and more powerful in her life. Sad, but true. He also observed all around him in the culture that with Hitler and with Mussolini, there were these terrible things happening. And these leaders, these dictators, it was a race for power. And what he called the power-love continuum. As they sought more power, they loved less. And as they chose to love less, they became more powerful. And so all of this is happening as he writes his research and makes these observations. And he observed it in the classroom. If you have a student who doesn't give a rip, that's a pretty powerful kid. And he observed that philosophy, the love of learning, couldn't happen in that environment. And this is in American classrooms in the 1930s. And it's pretty profound to look at his work and to say, wow, I see that happening. I see it happening in my marriage. I see it happening in my relationships. I see it happening where I work. And so we look at this principle of least interest, and it's discouraging. And yet there have been brave individuals throughout our history who have stepped in the midst of the principle of least interest and said, no, that's not the way it's going to work for me. Not for someone like Jesus, not for someone like Martin Luther King or someone like Gandhi. or someone like Mother Teresa, who step in and say, I won't get engaged in that race to the bottom. I won't be a part of it. Instead, I will choose to love the most. Because there are only two ways to get someone to do something that you want them to do. One is to force them, and the other is to have them choose to do it. We experience this when we drive down the road in Charlotte and the traffic cop steps out and stops us. That traffic cop doesn't have the power to stop your car, but he or she has the authority to stop your car. It's not like she's Superman or Superwoman who can actually, remember, when he pulls the crashing airline back away from crashing into the earth? She can't do that, but she stops you because you grant her the authority to stop you, because you realize that there are others who need out, and they need her authority to step in and say, no, I'm going to interrupt where you're going, and these people are going to go out. And you grant that authority to someone. Power is the ability to get someone to do what you want them to do because they have to, but authority is even better. It is the ability to get someone to do what you'd like for them to do because they want to. And as teachers, we have authority. And as these students love us, and as you exhibit for them love of them and of learning and of your subject, you become very, not really powerful, but you become inspirational. And they do these amazing things because of what you have become in their life. That's amazing. It's such a gift, and it makes education one of the most exciting things that we can do. And it makes us some of the most powerful people, really, in the world if we care about education. Because when all is said and done, what matters is what is done, right? And there are only two types of people. There are those who have something to say, and those that have to say something. The cool thing about teachers are those who love and exhibit philos and who step in and reject the principle of least interest and who say, like these teachers we heard before, I love these students. You could see it in their eyes. I love my subject. They're powerful people, and they're agents of change. And instead of seeing people who form identities and go out and do the absolute wrong thing, what happens when our schools are shot up? What happens? A student thinks through their identity that this is who I'm going to be. They imagine it, they go over and over again in their head, and then they go out and they do this terrible thing. In the same way, agents of good, through identities formed and shaped by those of us who are mentors and teachers, empower them and send them out to do good things. Empathy is internalized. Kindness becomes real and becomes an act. Because when all is said and done, what matters is what is done, not what is said. Thank you.